Welcome to the PACO podcast series. My name is Frank Otero. I'm the President, CEO of the PACO Group. Our topic today is disaster recovery. And as you know, we invite subject matter experts to share information and best practices on actual project experience. Our guests today are Lugo from Hill International and Pete Gaynor from Hill International. These two gentlemen are going to share their stories in terms of their experience in working with disaster recovery projects. I, for one, have very limited experience working directly in this sector, so it's going to be a learning exercise for me. But the image I always have about disaster recovery is that what I see on TV, where somebody's home has been blown away or set on fire or flooded, all the belongings. So the emotional aspect to me is what stands out. But these two gentlemen not only will talk about that, but also how disaster recovery projects are resolved and move forward, because that's the whole idea behind disaster recovery, is how do we, importantly, how do we mitigate and try to avoid these things from happening? And these will be some of the things that but let me start by having Louis introduce himself and talk a little bit about what his role is at Hill International in the disaster recovery.
Thank you, Frank. My name's Louis Lugo Jr. I'm Senior Vice President with Hill International. I am responsible for leading two market sector business groups. One is the Federal Business Group. The other is the Resiliency and Disaster Recovery business.
Frank, Pete Gaynor, I'm the Vice President for Resiliency and Disaster Recovery. Before coming to Hill, I was a professional emergency manager, starting out at the local level, the state level, and most recently as the FEMA Administrator in the first Trump administration.
Well, thank you both. And I'm looking forward to a very engaging conversation. Like I said earlier at the opening, my image of disaster recovery is those people on TV. But I know that there is a whole bigger story. And maybe, Pete, you can tell us about what happens after a disaster occurs, and what are some of the issues that people learn about in terms of whether it's insurance or lack of insurance, or what expectations in terms of what funding and financial assistance it will actually play out. Because I imagine a lot of people go through this for the very first time.
Yep.
Yeah, and have different expectations, only to learn that they're not going to get the whole house rebuilt,
So I think many of us believe that a disaster will never happen to us as individuals. For the most part, I think most Americans see disasters happening on TV, and they say, good thing it's not me. But the reality is that sometime in your life, whether it's you directly, your family, your business, you're going to be impacted by a disaster. It floods in nearly every county in America. It floods, right? So whether it's a big disaster or a small disaster, the odds are that you're going to be affected by a disaster. And if you are impacted by a disaster, it's really the last thing that you want to have happen to yourself. And so, some of the struggle is not being prepared ahead of time. So whether you're an individual or a community, a business not taking preparedness actions, not taking mitigation actions to reduce risk, not having the proper insurance to make sure that you're disaster proofed for that moment the disaster happens. All those things come together, and you can imagine a community that is not prepared as a community, underinsured as a community, only saw these disasters happen to others, and when the disaster happens, it's a traumatic event for that community. And it really comes down to I think from my perspective as an emergency manager, and especially as the FEMA Administrator, it's always about the disaster survivor, because it's that individual that we're trying to make warm, safe, and dry in that moment, right? To give them some hope about what happens next. But
Right.
The road to recovery is long and arduous and overwhelming for everyone.
Right. Well, like I said, my image is always that face on the TV screen of the family who just lost everything, you know. But Louis, how about from the business point of view? Because that's what you're in business for, right? Is how do you help these communities, these agencies, these government officials? Is your target market the FEMA or HUD or local government or a combination of all?
That's a great question, Frank. We target local government because the money is issued by the federal government by either FEMA or HUD through community development block grants for disaster recovery. But it goes to a grantee, and the grantee could be the state, it could be a county, it could be a city. So while the money is federal, once it arrives at the state, county, or city, it becomes local money. These programs are not a check in the bank to draw down from, but they're a reimbursement program, which means that these local governments are often not ready, not prepared to manage this kind of funding because it's all about compliance with the federal requirements in order to get the reimbursement, which means you have to spend the money in order to pay. So oftentimes governments, depending on how big or small they are, they're going to struggle with that because if they don't have the cash flow to pay the consultants and the contractors, they need to make sure that their programs are moving forward with proper funding. And that depends on how they set up their program, how they set up their reimbursements, and how they comply with either FEMA, HUD, or both. And our focus is to work with local governments. Now, the lifespan or the cycle of a disaster starts before the disaster in disaster preparedness. And then when a disaster occurs, you have what's called response and then recovery. So we typically focus a little bit on the response, but mostly on the recovery piece, which is where all the planning, engineering, and construction occurs. That's our sweet spot, as you all know. Hill International is a global company providing program, project, and construction management. We work for owners. Our job is to deliver the owner's vision, the owner's goals and objectives. So our target market is the grant recipient at the local level, which is either the state, the county, or the city.
Thank you, Louis. What is the reality of how long Sandy occurred how long ago? And we're still in recovery, aren't we?
And Katrina.
And
Right?
Katrina.
20 years later. Yep.
So what I think in addition to the victims of disaster and learning about what they will and will not be reimbursed, it's also how long this process takes.
It takes entirely too long. I think is the bottom line, and I think whether you're the federal government or a disaster survivor trying to make your way back to some normal life, it takes too long. I think part of that is each year, because no two disasters are exactly the same, no two circumstances are exactly the same. You may require new rules, new policies, new procedures based on what the disaster impacts just were, and then you add all those up over time, and you have a complicated federal system of disaster support. And I think that's one of the things I think the administration is trying to do, is trying to reform the way we deliver long-term disaster recovery in the United States. Extremely bureaucratic, takes way too long, way too expensive, and there's a better way to do it. But I think one of the things at Hill that we're trying to do is to try to speed that recovery by applying what we believe are commercial best practices to disaster recovery. So, and it's not a standard practice in the disaster world to apply, CMPM, PMO to long-term disaster recovery. It's one of the missing elements that the federal government has. So, for instance, if a state had a disaster and they were eligible for $5 billion, generally FEMA would just write that check for $5 billion and give it to the governor and say, here's all the rules about how you apply that. We're going to come back and audit it, but really good luck in actually turning that $5 billion into a meaningful disaster recovery. And and I think most elected leaders, especially those that have not had a disaster under their belt, most communities are project-based. One project at a time, because that's all they've known. Not multiple projects.
Program,
right? So I think one of the things that Louis and I are trying to do is deliver a commercial best practice to long-term recovery, to use the principles that the commercial world uses every day across the globe, right? Construction management, project management, and most importantly, programmatic management of the disaster. I believe you can demystify some of the disaster things that are problematic. You can save money. You can speed the time it takes to build a new school or a new fire department by using alternative methods of the construction. But again, all these terms are not in the vocabulary of emergency managers and elected leaders.
Lois, one of the things that strikes me is that a lot of times after a disaster, the people rebuild in the same location. What are your thoughts on that? Does Hill try to influence that thought process and build their new home in a different location, or what are your thoughts on that?
So the federal government, FEMA and HUD, look at every disaster post the event and evaluate, should we spend money rebuilding here? Certainly the federal government doesn't want to rebuild the way it was, because if a like event occurs, the same will happen. So the idea is to build a more resilient facility that'll be more able to survive another storm, another fire, or whatever the event was. But property laws, ownership laws, and different similar issues around the country give owners a lot of rights, and makes it very difficult for someone to have to basically abandon their property where their family's been for the past 200 years, have to relocate somewhere, or let the government buy it out at whatever the price is. So it becomes a big fight often between the people, the owners, and local and state government, which is ultimately what happened. So if you look at Sandy in New York, all the properties along the Atlantic area around Rockaway Park, New York, most of the peninsula was underwater 6, 7, 8 feet, including my house, which I lost during that event.
Yes, I remember. That was a very personal experience.
It was. It was. So,
is that what motivated you to get into disaster recovery?
Well, I spent a big chunk of my life in Puerto Rico, where I grew up, and hurricanes are normal in Puerto Rico. So that was my first experience. But yeah, that was a lot more personal. But the point I was trying to make, in New York City, if you go back to the Rockaways, aside from raising some homes, everything was rebuilt back exactly where it was. So what did change in the Rockaways was the boardwalk. So the boardwalk was made out of wood, and they rebuilt it to create a barrier to protect, and then they built the berms, and they did some other things to create resiliency. But beyond that resilient structure, you have the homes sitting in the same exact place. Mm-hmm. And 12 years ago, when Sandy came, it caused massive havoc in New York City, but we rebuilt billions of dollars of real estate back into the same place with little to no resiliency, except for raising some homes. So back to your question, how hard is it? It is very hard, because people want to go back into their home. People don't want to relocate. It's very seldom. Now, FEMA has buyout programs where they're focused on buying properties from owners to help them financially relocate, because FEMA doesn't want to come in another 5 years and have to rebuild the same home a second and a third time. But those programs are not always as successful as we would want.
Right.
Voluntary programs. Yeah. And just to
Sure.
put the period on that, I think the thing that most people don't understand is that, why are we allowing a homeowner or a business to build back in the place that was just destroyed? Well, it's really not the federal government's mandate to move you. It's really the local mandate. So building codes and zoning starts at the local level. The federal government and even the state sometimes, depending on what the rule of law is in the state, can recommend that you build a certain way, but they can't mandate you build a certain way or not build in the same location. So the responsibility for really strong building codes and zoning is on the locals. And so this is the tension in between. Why do we allow people to build back in the same place? Well, it's because either the zoning laws or the building code is not forward leaning. The elected leaders are not brave enough to actually make some long-term changes to prevent the same result from happening again. So we all share responsibility in this, but some of those really local issues are really local. They need to solve those local issues on their own.
All right. Well, I guess in addition to seeing what could be done at the FEMA level in terms of the administration of disaster recovery and HUD, what's both of your thoughts on global warming? I mean, isn't that contributing to this whole problem?
Well, I'll go first and then I'll let Pete go. We've looked at disasters going back 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And if I were to show you the chart, you would see the gradual increase over the last 15, 20 years since Katrina. So by just looking at that, you can tell there's something happening with global warming and it's having an impact. So I believe that global warming is in fact having an impact, and that our local leaders and all the way to the state and federal level have a responsibility to take that into account when looking at construction, when spending billions of dollars of taxpayer money to make certain that structures, facilities are resilient to weather impacts and other types of potential disasters, because it is absolutely on the increase. I mean, who could have thought that New York City would get hit by a massive storm like Sandy? And I think before Sandy, the last time something like that hit New York was close to 100 years before. Mm-hmm. So it's real, it's happening, and all you got to do is look around, because it's happening right now. Yep. New Jersey last night was burning. Massive wildfires in New Jersey. So it's happening all over the U.S.
And Pete?
Yeah, it's happening, and it's happening more and more each year. And again, back to Lewis's point, we track the cost of disasters year by year. And last year, 2024, there were $24 billion disasters just in the U.S. And if you look across the globe, that number is exceeded by probably 100 on the cost of disasters. So disasters are more costly now. They're more intense. They have more impact, especially on places that have significant infrastructure. And so I'm from the emergency management world, and my job is to respond to all these things, right, in a practical way, right. It's to get out there and do preventive measures to lessen the impacts of these disasters. And so I think one of the things that every government needs to do, whether it's at the local level, state level, or federal level, is make investments in pre-disaster investments, vice post-disaster investments. And so those billion-dollar disasters are money that that the federal government and others are putting towards the disaster after the fact. There's all sorts of studies about how valuable pre-disaster investments are. For every $1 invested, you can save $6 on the other end. So it makes economic sense to do pre-disaster investments. So things like mitigation, the seawall, right? That's a mitigation effort. If we put more of our money and treasure into pre-disaster investments, and then hopefully you would lessen. You're not going to prevent disasters, but you would prevent or lessen the impact from disasters. You would help communities respond and recover faster from a disaster and get back to go back to normal life a little bit faster. So there's lots you can do on climate change, I think, to lessen that. But the practical side of it is what do we have to do tomorrow, because a disaster is coming tomorrow. And what can we do today to lessen the impact on our disaster survivors?
Let's talk a little bit about the economics, okay? Because I think that there's an expectation that when a disaster happens, that FEMA has to foot the bill for the entire replacement of a home, for example. Yeah. But that's not the case, right?
That is not the case.
And also, the homeowner, in terms of what kind of insurance that they're carrying, also has a bearing on what reimbursements they're entitled to. Correct?
Correct.
Can you talk about that? So,
and I think it's probably a common misperception that FEMA does not make you whole if you're a disaster survivor.
What percent is it?
It depends where you are, but I mean the maximum you can get as an individual. You have this program called IA, Individual Assistance. I think the maximum that you can derive from the federal government is about $52,000.
$52,000.
That's if all the programs are turned down, and that's if you're eligible for all the programs. The average is.
So if you have $1 million home that gets blown away on a fire, like what's happened in California, you're saying all that they're entitled to is $52,000?
Well, from the individual assistance program, right? That's the immediate needs kinds of things. And so, but you look at past disasters, I think the average disaster payout is somewhere between $5,000 and $6,000. That's all you're really going to get out of it, because not many people qualify for every single program under IA. So the alternative is to have insurance. And so, I made a comment about it floods in most every county in America every year. And so to have flood insurance. So if you're a homeowner out there, you're not really sure if you have flood insurance, here's the simple rule. If the rain or the water comes in through the roof, your homeowner's policy should cover it. If the water comes in through the front door, your homeowner's policy will not cover it. So you need flood insurance. And so typically insurance brokers don't sell flood insurance because it's really it's a federal program, NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program. You really have to ask for it. It's really not that expensive when you consider the cost of a home and all the inconvenience you got to have by not living in your home. But if you have flood insurance, you can recoup a lot of your money for the structure and for the contents. And I know I shared a story yesterday about going out to a middle-class neighborhood in Oklahoma, in Tulsa, one time. Solidly middle-class neighborhood had been flooded. Talking to the homeowners about, how are you going to rebuild? And my first question was to homeowners, did you have flood insurance? And the answer is no, I didn't have flood insurance. Okay, well, that's not going to work out too well in your favor. And so my second question to the homeowner was, did you have homeowners insurance? And the answer was no. And I asked, well, why not? Well, the house was passed down from my family. My father gave it to me. There was no mortgage. There was no necessity to have insurance. And, I needed that, whatever that premium was a year, for something else. And so I gave up homeowners insurance. And so think about that, our own personal lives. If something happened to your home without homeowners insurance, no matter what that coverage may be on that house, but having zero, how would you recover from that as an individual? So again, I think the best defense for Americans, no matter where they live and no matter what disasters they are at risk for, is to have adequate insurance. I think it's one of the most important things you can do for yourself and your family and your business.
Louis, you're the BD guy, so how do you identify this market and try to penetrate it? Because a big part for what I hear is education, in terms of having a programmatic approach to the recovery effort as opposed to individual projects handled by local contractors, So I guess you try to sell the vision of a hill in terms of trying to look at this from a broader perspective and the best practices that can be applied in program management and construction management, correct? But tell us, what are the challenges that you face in trying to educate communities who have been affected by a disaster?
So the trick is to identify susceptible markets that we think eventually might have a disaster, and develop a relationship with them early, get emergency contracts in place, do lunch and learns with them, volunteer to do workshops, meet them at different conferences, educate them through that process.
And these are who are you targeting at these?
We're targeting grant recipients, so we're targeting groups of people at the state level, groups of people at the county level, and then on a more specific basis, some larger cities like New York, Houston, LA, Miami. And these are potential grant recipients. And the idea is to develop rapport, trust, relationship, and use our expert knowledge of not just FEMA and HUD, but also of planning and rebuilding post a disaster, to demonstrate to them the value of considering implementing a PMO approach to a recovery program that more often than not it's worth in the billions of dollars. Because building one singular project is one thing, but building 100 or 200 or thousands of projects, because a single home is a project, is a whole different ballgame. Mm-hmm. And as I said earlier in our conversation, the program is a reimbursement program. So you're not going to get any money unless you request the money through the reimbursement process. And the easiest way to get your money is to be compliant with the process and the rules and the regulations. And that is a little convoluted, and you got to know exactly how to do it, and you got to implement and establish the proper workflows. You have to use technology and systems and tools to track and monitor and report. And so there's a method to the process, and unless you're an expert at that process and that methodology, you're going to do what I like to call discovery learning. And that is the worst way of approaching a disaster recovery program. Sure. Because you're going to fail. Mm-hmm. So Pete was talking about these programs last too long. The reason they often take too long is because many of these programs fail not once or twice. In some cases, they failed 3 times or more. And the consultant that started the PMO, the recovery program, is no longer there because they were terminated, or when their contract expired, they rebid the contract and they weren't selected because they weren't doing so well. So this is part of the process that happens. And Pete and I and at Hill International, we're trying to educate the owners. We're trying to educate the market. We're doing everything we can to get to them. We're talking to people at FEMA. We're talking to people at HUD. We're talking to governors. We're talking to city mayors, chiefs of staff. Hill is a member of the Governors Association. We're a member of the Chief of Staff's Association, to the Mayor's Conference, and we attend all these meetings, and it's all focused on connecting with them, educating them, because if they have the right information, then they'll make the right decisions. Oftentimes, it's not that they want to do the wrong thing, they just don't know any better. So we're doing the best that we can. That way, Pete is always out, active, writing articles. We're here today because we want to get the word out, and it's all about education.
How big is the market?
It's billions of dollars upon billions of dollars, because think of it this way. A disaster happens, it's funded. The life cycle of a disaster recovery, it's no less than 10 plus years. In most cases, it's more than 15 years. So year after year after year, you're piling billions on billions on billions. So the market is tens and twenties of billions of dollars, and it keeps growing every year. So the billions that were allocated this year stay allocated. Then next year, they're going to be a 30, 40, 50 billion on top of the billions that were spent this year, and it keeps piling up. So it's a massive market. It's massive. So the opportunity for businesses, it's real. But
I have to start looking at that market then.
you should. You should.
Or Pete.
So if I could just
Sure, you
so,
want
I,
to
so I think just elected leaders, most of them don't have a disaster background. Many of them have a business background, and many others have no background in either one. Right? They're a brand new elected leader, and the main business of a city. So I consider myself fortunate to work for I work for two mayors, I work for a governor, I work for a president at all levels of government. And the main business line of a government is if you're a mayor, make sure you have you pick up the garbage, fill the potholes, make sure you have enough police, make sure you have public schools, fire, all those things that are basic necessities in the city. And you have no bandwidth, right? Everything that you do every day in most every whether jurisdiction, whether it's a state or local, you're tapped out for bandwidth, and you're tapped out for appropriated funds, right? You have a budget, you're trying to operate with that. Everyone wants more and more money each year based on all the new projects that everyone wants to do, and then you're hit with a disaster. And a disaster is, and I'm not sure many appreciate this, but a disaster is your second business line, right? So you're still gonna have to conduct the normal business of government, fill the potholes, put the cops on the street, but you're also gonna have to do this new business of disaster recovery. And in some cases, the money that you get from the federal government, whether it comes from FEMA or from HUD or from both, will exceed your appropriated funds by tens, maybe hundreds. And so imagine if your local budget is $500 million and the federal government just said estimated damages for your city is $5 billion. I think most elected officials say, well, we're going to try to do this within the construct that I have, which is the normal, make government work every day, right? The normal business line, and they try to apply all that to running a business line that is, try to spend $5 billion. I mean, it's hard. I mean, it's nice to have $5 billion, but try to spend $5 billion. It's bone crushing. So our alternative is we're going to help you with the second business line. We want to set up a project management office to allow you to run government the way that you ran government before the disaster, and concurrently conduct a meaningful, efficient recovery for your community so you can get back to normal. I think most elected leaders don't look at it that way, but when you really think about it, there really is no other way to do it. So you have these disasters like Katrina, 20 years in the making. 20 years. I mean, it's a long time to still be trying to plug along, trying to build schools and trying to build fire stations 20 years after the disaster happens. And the value of that money that you got back in 2005 from Katrina, the whatever the billions of dollars, every year that value of that money is lessened by
Inflation,
right, all that. So it's in your best interest to try to spend that money wisely, but spend it quickly so you get the maximum value. I think that's what we're trying to do at Hill.
Interesting. Well, is there a case study that you can share with us, or something recent?
So probably the most recent thing we're doing is in California. Pete and I are engaged with local government. We've met with officials at the state level. We've met with officials at the county level. We've met with officials at the city level. And we met with a group, and I'm not going to call out who they were, and they suffered some damage to their, let's call it their facilities. And the purpose of our meeting was to understand how they were going to proceed, if there was going to be an opportunity for us to engage with them. And they shared with us how they were going to proceed. And Pete had an opportunity to talk to them. And I think Pete referred to it, we can help you see around the corner And Pete started talking about the challenges of the reimbursement process. Once you get the money from FEMA and FEMA says you get X number of dollars, how you can get that money, how we turn on the spigot, maintain the cash flow, how do you stay compliant within all the FEMA requirements, making sure that you don't issue contracts that are not in line with the FEMA rules, because then that makes all that money you spend not eligible for funding. So you can do everything right and still not be able to recover any of the money because you didn't follow any of the rules. So knowing all of that up front is absolutely critical. So to our surprise, they came out with an RFP that basically we saw our language, but we were there educating them. Had we never met with that client, they would have absolutely proceeded the way they were going. They would have done and executed their recovery projects, but then they probably would have gone to FEMA to try to recoup all or some of that money, and they would have found out too late that those projects were not eligible for funding. So there's a real live example of something that happened just weeks ago where we were able to, in a positive way, impact an owner that is serving the local community and taxpayers, in that through our engagement, they were able to understand the value of having a consultant that could help them with the FEMA program. So there's a live case study for you.
Is there any sort of public-private organization that is trying to create this model vision that you talk about in terms of getting the FEMA and others to understand the value proposition involved in looking at a disaster recovery from a programmatic perspective as opposed to a bunch of individual projects?
Yeah, it's I would call it a work in progress.
Okay.
I happen to be the chairman for the Disaster Recovery Coalition of America, which has 51 of the I would say the most important companies, Hill being one of the members, and these are the companies that put America back together again after disaster. So
is this public-private or
it's
private?
It's a coalition. So you can join as you can join as a public company. It's not private.
No, what I meant is public officials as well as the
no,
private business sector.
It's really just the private sector. Yeah,
Just the private
no
sector.
public officials. But we have engagement with government officials at every level. So it's
Okay.
important that we do all that. I think the path that the Hill team has been on, the RDR team has been on, is really the education part of it, trying to share this vision about how to do disaster recovery faster. And I tell people, if I was administrator today, knowing what I know now, because I consider myself a lifelong learner, and as a local emergency manager, a state emergency manager, and as a FEMA administrator, I really didn't appreciate what CM, PM, and project management was until I came to Hill and really learned about the value of it. So if I was administrator today, I would mandate that before I gave a governor a check for $5 billion, it would be mandatory for you to use commercial best practices in construction management, project management, and most importantly, programmatic oversight of your disaster. It's in the best interest of your government, if you're the governor of a state. It's in the best interest of the disaster survivor. It's in the best interest of the American taxpayer, right? If you could cut Katrina in half, do it in 10 years, vice 20, and by the way, Katrina won't be over for another couple of years, right? So, but if you could just cut a percentage of how long it takes disasters to or recoveries to happen, you would save tens of billions of dollars, and you would have disaster survivors that get back to normal faster, right? I look at it as it's a business decision. It's a smart business decision if you're a governor to employ these. And when you think about the cost, how much is it? Because everything costs money, right? When you look at the cost of delay and the cost of inflation over time, employing a company like Hill to do CMPM is for me, it's a no-brainer, right? It's a wise investment that will pay off dividends hundreds and thousands of times because you use these best practices.
Well, just invite PACO to the team, okay?
You're invited.
This has been very, very interesting conversation. What would be your parting thoughts and comments that you would like to make?
That we hope that the approach to disaster recovery be one that starts with program, project, and construction management. As Pete said so well, it's going to save time. It's going to get people back in their homes, communities back to normal a lot quicker. It's going to save billions of dollars in taxpayer money. It's going to prevent a lot of the delays that are caused by bad decision making. You know, when we give an owner at any level timely, intelligent, actionable information, they can make the right decisions, and they will. Our job as consultants is to work with our owners, understand their vision, their goals, their objectives, tell them what they need to know, not what they want to know, and guide them towards the end. But every single time when we do all of that, they always make the right decisions because everyone's trying to do the right thing every day.
Sure.
So that's what we live for. And in the world of disaster recovery, the impact to business, the impact to humans, to families, to entire community is just devastating. I mean, you just look at what happened in North Carolina not too long ago and how that impacted that community is just devastating. Mm-hmm. So I think it's incumbent upon every leader in government, whether you're at the local level, the county level, the state level, and at the federal level, to look for ways to implement these commercial best practices so that we can achieve the end state, which is we can't prevent the disaster, but we can certainly take action after it and get people back to normal a lot quicker if we do the right thing. And all the know-how is here. You know, we know how to do it. It's proven. So I'm just saying let's do it, because anything else is just insanity to me.
Pete, final thoughts?
Final thoughts. I wrote an article on this whole topic, so I'm going to share it with you. And if you could share it with your viewers, I think that would be valuable if you want to know more about why this is valuable to you.
Sure.
And then I think the last thing is really, again, as an emergency manager, it's always about the plight of a disaster survivor. So if you haven't been impacted by a disaster and you've seen it on TV, I would consider yourself lucky. And again, having seen most every kind of disaster that can happen in the United States, I've been there and I've been on probably 300 different kinds of disasters. You know, the one thing an individual can do for themselves, because it is not just about the federal government coming to the rescue, or the state coming to the rescue, or a local coming to the rescue. It really starts with the local, right? The local individual, right? Taking preparatory actions for you and your family and for your business. So the one thing that everyone can do today is go to that file where you have your insurance policy and look at what coverage is, right? And take a hard look at it. If you lost your home today, would that policy get you close to making you whole, right? Or are there faults in that? And matter of fact, having been out in California recently, no matter your economic, where you live economically, whether you're on the lower band of economics or on the high band, lack of proper insurance, whether you own a $250,000 home or you own a $250 million home, is a big issue. So for those out there, look at your insurance policy. If you can afford it, make an investment in that insurance policy, because that really is your best against most any kind of disasters. If you need flood insurance, you should have flood insurance, and you can do that through your whatever agent sells you the premium. You can get flood insurance for your home. But I would say if you're listening to this and you haven't been impacted by a disaster, you will be. But again, the best defense is proper insurance, and then obviously making those investments to make sure that you and your family stay safe should a disaster beset you.
Well, thank you both. Louis,
Thank you for
good
inviting us.
seeing you again.
Yes, sir.
And Pete, pleasure meeting
Nice
you.
to meet you. Thank you for
okay?
inviting us today.
And our audience, this is the end of this particular podcast. We hope that you have found this subject matter to be of interest. Certainly, it's been an education for me, and I welcome your thoughts and comments. Write to PACO Group at our website, which will be posting this podcast, and LinkedIn and a few other social media. And we look forward to hearing from you and what your thoughts are. And again, thank you both.
Thanks, Frank.